This is the Cameron Journal Podcast. It's a place where we talk about important things. It's a place where we bring a little slice of the news to you. It's a place where we do important things, have important conversations. It's also things that I like to talk about. My name is Cameron Cowan, and this is the Cameron Journal Podcast. Today on the Cameron Journal Podcast, we are happy to welcome Daniel Sanderson to the podcast. He is the founder and CEO of a new media company called Planksip, and they do all sorts of exciting things, including deep dives on stuff, a very exciting several YouTube channels, one of which I'll be appearing on next Tuesday, and which will have long come out by the time you hear this, and all sorts of interesting things. And we're going to learn more about him, his career, where he came from, how he got here, and how this wonderful media company got started. So this will be an exciting conversation, and I'm sure it will lead to all sorts of interesting places. So welcome, Daniel, to the Cameron Journal Podcast. How are you?
Oh, fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Good. Well, thank you. So why don't we start straight from the beginning? I was reading about you a little bit online, and I found out you got your start, I think, in architecture, which I thought was very interesting. So why don't you tell us how you got from buildings to online media? That sounds interesting.
Well, the one aspect of buildings that I'm an expert in is the building envelope, which is that barrier that separates the outside from the inside. Mm. And I live on the West Coast. It's particularly rainy, and there's a lot of moisture in our area of the climate. So that's what we have to contend with a lot in the particular area on the West Coast of Canada and throughout the Pacific Northwest of the United States. Now, the listeners should probably be aware that I'm not an architect. I never was an architect. I went to business school, and then I went the route of the capitalist, and I started my own business, and I sold products to the architectural industry, and I have been in probably over 1,000 architects' offices giving presentations about various different products, primarily focused on building envelope.
Fantastic. Well, I was wondering how that all happened. So now that we understand that, you grew from that, and then you got into the game of digital media. When did you decide to leave building envelopes behind and get into the digital arts?
Well, I've just come up with that response just as you've brought it up. Let me label it and describe it for the audience in a true phenomenological sort of way, and that's just through description. We
really haven't got to the public philosopher part. We'll get there in a minute.
Yeah, right. So I basically had a four horsemen, I guess, almost midlife crisis. Right. I mean, if I'm going to degrade myself and throw myself under the bus, I think that's probably the best way to describe it. I want you to picture somebody that lives and breathes business, operations, taxes, growth, these types of things, right? Like, to be a successful entrepreneur and to get a company into the multi-million-dollar sort of price bracket, you have to be focused. And it was right around the time when I discovered and was lured into the New Atheist movement with the Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett, that I thought, wait a minute, these guys have nothing to do with business and they're kind of cool. And I haven't really been in the mind space of biology or the beautiful writing of Christopher Hitchens, right? I haven't explored literature like I really thought I would have liked to. So basically, my life took a very sharp turn. And whether it's for the good or not, I don't know. Maybe the jury's still out on that.
Yeah, so what so you got so that's how you kind of got into all that. And now you've leaned in heavy to it all and you're a public philosopher philosophizing. What has that been like? How's that been different than what you came from?
Well, it's very hard to make money at that. I mean, I've had conversations with myself, and I've heard this in society at several times in several places. Imagine you had a child, and they came to you and they said, "Hey, Dad, I'd like to be a philosopher for a living." Um, well, son, we might have to just, as long as you know, there's probably not a lot of money in that. Now, I mean, I don't know. I think it was Thales. I'm not sure if it was Thales, but there was one story of a philosopher that bulked up on olive presses and made a killing because he was able to time that correctly back in ancient times. But for the most part, it's just not something that's looked as, and I mean making money is not looked at as something that is like an intellectually high serving pursuit. Or even anything that's really beneficial for society, which kind of blows my mind in a way.
No, you actually did. It's funny you said because you did things in reverse order. We did a study at the University of Northern Colorado where I went to undergrad, and it was often cited. Philosophy majors 2 years out from their undergrad are the poorest. 20 years out, they're the richest because they all go out and start businesses.
Oh,
It's really weird. Like a lot of people coming out of the philosophy department end up being very entrepreneurial. They go out and start businesses and then they do very well. It just takes a long time. Whereas the business majors come out and they're the highest, usually them in tech are the highest earning after undergrad, but their wages stagnate on the long term. Whereas philosophy majors, it's much more of an upswing. And so you end up, in, 20 years out, 25 years out with, philosophy majors catching up to your business and tech people who have stagnated. So you just did it, but in reverse order. So it makes
yeah.
sense it makes sense to me that would be that would be the case. And incidentally, I was friends with all the philosophy kids in undergrad. I was one class short of a minor in philosophy for my undergrad. And um they're all doing very well. I'm not quite 20 years out. I'm 15 years out, and they're all the one became a doctor. We'll put him to one side. But yeah, they've all started their own little businesses. One's into permaculture. It's a whole thing. Like it's
Huh.
just amazing where people end up.
Huh.
So yeah.
Yeah.
So but it is rather interesting that, with wanting to pursue that. So what was like in terms of day one? So I presume that you sold off your other business. And then there was that first day of, okay, I want to explore literature and do all of those things. Where did you start? Where did you begin? Did you just like invade a Barnes and Noble and just buy whole bookshelves of things? Like this whole stack, I'll take the whole thing, just take it out to my car. Like how did you begin?
Well, in the spirit of friendship, which is really in a hierarchy above justice. In fact, I don't know if you knew that, but there's no need for justice if there's a pervasive purity of friendship between people. And one thing I want to talk about and plug you on is I was really impressed with your list of books that you've read.
Oh,
And
thank you. He's referring to the official book list. which is available at CameronJournal.com. Yes, that's my recommended reading list if one wants to be well read.
Yeah, and I look at that and I think, I mean, you've got all the bones there for, like you say, being well read. But there's some, I just glanced at it, but there's a lot of classics there, of which there's many of those are fun book reviews on Planksip. And the where did I start? I guess it wasn't a cut and dry. It wasn't a start on Monday morning sort of thing. I just found that I was losing interest. Now, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm reluctantly in a class of ADHD or anything, in some sort of a high functioning sort of group. But I think that when I when I look at my attention span and what I focus on, if I lose interest in it, right, we could call it passion, but if I lose interest in it, then it's I just can't sustain it. I can't sustain it. And so maybe it was the fact that making money and selling architectural products was boring. It didn't captivate my imagination. And so it was actually a relatively slow process. I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine who inspired me a lot to read The Four Horsemen. And I could not get through a philosophy book. I would read one paragraph, not understand a word of it, and then read it again and not understand it, get frustrated and put it down. Right. And that's not like me. That feels like a challenge. And it was kind of a challenge. I was like, damn it, I'm going to understand this stuff. Right. And I think what happened is that my reading took off from a nonfiction standpoint. So I'm going to name drop a little bit, but I only name drop because I think they were really inspirational and influential thinkers for me in the early days. This is prior to any, I'm not going to name a single philosopher, but Robert Sapolsky, which is an endocrinologist and a primatologist, his YouTube channel and videos, I guess videos are all over the Stanford site. He's quite an amazing academic, I think. His book Behave, I've read multiple times. And James Glick, I think that was really good. The reason I bring him up next to Sapolsky is because I heard James Glick's book Chaos recommended by Sapolsky in an interview or some sort of video I was watching. And I think, and basically Robert Sapolsky said, it's the one book he's read where he immediately, when he finished it, he picked it up and read it again. Right? Like, that's good. That's a good book to want to read, right?
Indeed.
And so what I would do is maybe feed somewhat of a healthy addiction and say, I want to go and get that book and I want to read it and I want to read all of James Glick's stuff, which of course I did, and consume all of Sapolsky's stuff. But the reason I bring the two of those up in a pair is that the beauty about academic reading and reading nonfiction books is that there's so much information to learn. It's not a summary and what can I summarize it like a headline on a social media post. There's so much information in a well-written nonfiction book, in the footnotes, in the references. Try changing your cadence of reading. Try note-taking. Try listening to an audible version while you're note-taking. Try and create content while you're reading it. So that act of creation is a really beautiful exercise to reinforce and myelinate learning around the concepts that are available in these books. right? Okay. So I've just given you two names, but let me give you a few more. So um, Steven Pinker's wonderful. His books are quite awesome. I got special permission to publish him on Planksip. In particular, a an article on belligerence where he's responding to Nassim Taleb about calling him a science writer, which was an interesting tit for tat thing that they did as academics. So I don't know. Do you remember that at all? That whole situation between Taleb and Pinker?
One of my philosophy friends told me about it as sort of a joke sort of thing. I was not at the scene of the crime when it happened. I was just kind of made aware of it sometime later. So no, I don't really remember it happening. I was just aware that it happened, but yes, it was entertaining. It was entertaining.
Yeah, and so when I alluded to a few sentences ago or a minute or so ago about the act of creating, um, I I wrote an article. I got permission from Pinker to republish his response on the belligerence of Taleb, and and then I actually created some digital art around it. Right, so I actually took a heavy set guy jumping on the bell curve, right, and kind of pushing out the pushing out the ends of the bell curve, right? So, and it actually, what happens when you do that, for anybody that knows Taleb's work, is that he just bashes the almost idealistic Platonic ideal of making the meridian a bell curve and trying to fit everything, to a normal distribution. Right now, I don't know if the audience knows what I'm talking about, or if I'm just using jargon, but I will tell everybody here, I'm a layman philosopher. So I intentionally use jargon because I reach up and I want people to reach up. I don't do it to obfuscate. I don't do it to confuse people. I do it because words are powerful, and I choose those words intentionally. It's how I write. When I read, I like to stop and I like to have a dictionary beside me. And I think that provides amazing insight and instant gratification on learning. Right. And whether it
No,
violates or
that
not
was
is
how
another
I was
story.
that was how I was raised. My mother would never tell me what words meant. I always had to go find out for my own, which then got me into reading the dictionary. I used to have years and years ago, I had a copy of the Oxford New English American Dictionary and or New American English Dictionary. That's the correct order of those words. And I read that cover to cover a couple times. And that's, if anything, I've had to break myself of the habit of using really expansive language and really precise words because people just they don't learn this type of language anymore. It's not accessible to people. And so I've really had to tone it down. But when I was younger, I didn't shy away from precise, advanced language from a very young age. So I think you've taken the correct path.
Well, you know what, my friend, I am almost going to urge you to pursue that a little bit. And I think I've had the privilege of reading some of your writing and some of your work. And I hope to see a lot more as we develop our friendship. And I think that um, I'm excited to see what you can produce when you put when you fire on all cylinders, I guess, right? Intellectually. That's one of the things that I encourage people to do on Planksip. And the reason is that I want to try and say that it's a little bit different than trying to write for an audience at Planksip. I think the starting point is that you write for yourself, and it's not selfish. It's trying to be on that event horizon of using the process of writing to understand. And be truly captivated by a subject and journal, right? Write in the margins, try and articulate it and learn it and break it down and write it and create it. That's what I want Planksip to be for people, because I know it is for me. And so that's my challenge to you, is that I want to see you elevate your writing in that direction. And
No,
anybody
the difficult, I mean, for me, it's really difficult because for me to do that well requires a word count that I think most people find a bit off-putting. Even some of the rather shorter things that I write these days, I don't do much under 750 words anymore. A lot of things are 1,000. Um, in fact, I wrote a piece recently called Russia and the Grand Narrative, where I kind of went over, the history of Russia and why invading Ukraine was so important. And that clocks in at 1,200 words. And I was speeding through the history and the information as fast as possible. That's kind of the part that always kind of makes me a little bit nervous, is because I'm kind of like, if I go on for 2,000, 3,000 words, who is going to read this in this day and age? Nobody. Like,
yeah.
It's, I mean, and I'm better than BuzzFeed. I have people, literally that I've had contribute to the site. 500 words is a stretch for them. So, so I appreciate that. I appreciate that, and I love that, and I definitely am into, I'm definitely into being in a place where deep dives are welcome and encouraged. When it comes to finding an audience for that, what has that been like? I guess we're going to get into Planksip right now, but like, how have you found an audience that's ready for long form deep dives? Because they're not at the Cameron Journal. Let me just say that.
Yeah.
I love my readers to death, but they are not a long. They're not a long form deep dive crowd.
Look, I think the best thing is to rate the content that most challenges you and aids your learning, right? I suppose. I mean, that's probably the easiest way I can explain it. But once that's out, then I think that's when it starts. That's when it begins to unfold. So, creating videos, creating content, making use of the multi media, right? So long form discussion is great. We're both doing it. But unless you're a very, very well-known intellectual celebrity, it's very hard to get people to stay past 12 minutes. They don't emotionally have a buy-in with you, right? Say you do a live event for 45 minutes to an hour. Well, you can see from the YouTube metrics, they're just going to drop off after 12 minutes if you're lucky.
Right.
So, you got to make those things, you have to make those things entertaining, right? And so I think there's a time and a place. The reason why I'm moving around so much is I've got this little dog that's a lap dog, right?
Yes. We love the doggos. It's okay.
Yeah, so she doesn't understand that I'm recording, and she's good now, but she's positioned herself right underneath the computer, right? So the lap is, she owns that spot, right?
Exactly. And she's retaken possession as of now. No, I mean, it is true. Like, it is definitely one of the things that I've always prided myself on, is keeping things entertaining enough that people, not everybody, but a lot of people do stick around. I remember when it's not as high as it used to be, but several years ago, I was always proud of the fact that my on-page time average at the Cameron Journal was almost a minute and a half. And the sad thing is, in internet time, that's an eternity. But people would stay and read and scan and go watch videos, mine or other people's, or all this type of thing. I have a whole cadre of people that love the podcast and the audio stuff because they're vacuuming, they're cleaning the house, they're driving to work. I intentionally make my episodes 45 minutes to be about the length of an average commute, because I tell people, take me to work with you. It's really easy. And so trying to make all of these things really accessible, is kind of what my whole thing has been. So So our working together is going to be different because it will be by its very nature a bit less accessible because it's going to be much. I mean, that's what I was thinking and kind of like, does he have any idea how long these pieces could get? Things will be much longer and much deeper, and so, but it'll be fun. It'll be fine. And yeah, it's a difficult thing, you know.
Well, shit, I
It's
work with academics, right? And they're publishing stuff and putting them in journals. And, where do I go? Well, I mean, I have I'm constantly going to journals like PNAS and, reading through their headlines, or quote headlines. So, I try not to skim through them. I try to really spend some time with them and try and note take. And it's like the investigative journalist in me is doing it with not current events, but with like literature and what other people are writing, and not to prove them wrong, but to try and extract and try and learn from what they've put together. Um, I spend a lot of time in the footnotes, almost in anything I read. I spend a lot of time on the structure of the book, on the index. I have a proprietary, I guess we could say it's proprietary, because I've created a system where I analyze the index of a book. And this was part of some of the work I wanted to do as a philosopher, trying to create something called an objective ontology. And so it is like a micro ontology. It's not an all encompassing ontology in terms of a state of being for the existence of humanity, but it is an ontology somewhat similar to a sense that you would use in computer science, right? I mean, the existence of a particular program or programming language could be resubstantiated if you had the bare essentials of this element, and this element all put together, and what does it look like? And that's kind of how a computer science ontology is described. The way I do the objective ontologies on a book review or book study is to look at instances of the index and see how the index is put together. So if there's a disproportionate amount of citations towards women in history, and I went there only because a lot of times there's a disproportionate mention towards men, which seems to be a little bit of the norm. And for whatever reason, I'm not going to delve into why that is the case, but if there was a disproportionate amount of women in it, then you could say, oh, well, that's interesting. And why is that the case? Right. And, you might know that automatically from the title, but what you're looking for is some things that you may not have known about the data and the correlations that you see in the in the data set that you essentially gather, right? Now, I'll give you one example. I've, like him or love him, Jordan Peterson. Okay, he's a force that has infiltrated our culture. I think he thinks he's
infected, more like it.
Well, okay, yeah. So I mean, I have a healthy annoyance, we'll say, with him. But I don't begrudge him. I think he's on his own hero's journey, and I think it's on his own hero's journey because I think he feels like he's fighting a like almost like a he's on an apologetic of sorts, right? And he really, I mean, anyways, that's enough said about that. But I did an extensive analysis of his books, Maps of Meaning, which is horrible, by the way. I think personally. But I looked at it, and there's certain people that he mentions that I find that he will talk a lot about Carl Jung or Jung, right? In his stand-up routines.
Yes.
And but there's other thinkers that are mentioned as much in his book that we don't really hear him vocalize as much. And so that was an eyebrow raising, something that was intriguing to me, that drew attention to the fact that maybe I should look up some of these people that he constantly refers to, but hasn't really taken on the roadshow, right? And then I was really happy to discover a few other thinkers that that I didn't know. And then I think I understand Jordan's perspectives a little bit more, right? I don't think he's pulling from a rich enough vessel. I think he's missing a lot of the equation. I think he's basically, like, we would accuse scientists of cherry picking data. And I think, there's some of that goes on with Jordan. Right.
I feel like Jordan Peterson, and I wrote a piece called My Obligatory Tristis on Jordan Peterson. And I wrote about my discovery of him, and I was not in a good mental health place when I discovered Jordan Peterson. And I ended up interacting with a PhD in behavioral psychology who has a great YouTube channel named Cass Arris. She did a complete series of videos on his first book. Mm-hmm. And I actually ran her Discord for a while. But it was an interesting sort of thing. And I think not only does he kind of cherry pick data and instances and examples, he has a very particular, very narrow narrative about life, particularly when it comes to the lives of men, that I find regressive at best and stuck in the past. I'm working on a piece right now called Future Nostalgia, where I'm talking about why we seem to be stuck in the past and nostalgia and we're not looking forward. And I think there's a couple reasons for that. Some of them are economic, some of them are social. Some of them have to do with it kind of being the end of history. The next thing hasn't started yet. So in the future, so amorphous, we can't conceive of it. It's really a failure of imagination. But Peterson really is trying to call us back to a very old-fashioned, regressive version of manhood, and masculinity that, to be very honest, is really no longer useful in our modern civilized society. And I think that because that's kind of his narrative on that subject anyway, he makes everything fit that narrative. Whether it's the lobsters eating each other in the bucket or, all this type of thing, everything has to serve that narrative of things have gone horribly wrong. We must go back to the way things used to be and gone. And I think people have identified with that and dialed in with that because, he was the first to come out and say, you can have whatever pronouns you want, but I'm not using them. That's coerced speech. And he's the first to come out and be kind of like, look, all this progress, all these way things are changing, all the new things that people are doing, that's not good. We really need to go backwards. Things were better in the past. And I think for people who are nostalgic for a simpler time, a more stable time, even though that's not real, it's an illusion, but that's what people think. Perception is reality. That's where he has his appeal. And I think not only is that regressive, it's incredibly dangerous, because when you start leading people down that path, you get fascism and autocracy real fast. It doesn't take long. In 1930s Germany, when Hitler was painting this picture of Germany as, the country with the big main character energy in Europe, and how, glorious and wonderful the German past was, and we have to recapture that and all that type of thing. We saw how that ended. Mussolini did the same thing with Italy. He was all about the Roman aesthetic, all this type of thing to recall a more glorious past. And when you start to have large portions of society who are engaging in this false nostalgia. Adam Curtis talks about this in his documentary Hypernormalization. When you get that energy going, almost 110% of the time, at least, of fascism and autocracy. The Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, same story. On the planet, you see it over and over and over again. And I worry that Peterson has influenced a lot of young men to want to look for this better past where things were more fair and better for them, and there were no trans people and no gay people and all this type of thing. And we're not going to escape that without seeing the profound social consequences of that.
Mm.
And we kind of already see it now with Peterson. He's had other people kind of break off from him and do the same thing. You have Andrew Tate and his whole cadre, the whole pickup artist scene. There's all this stuff now of these regressive, toxic things that are being elevated and platformed as good and positive things, the way the world really should be. And that's going to have social consequences that we have not fully realized yet. And so in that way, I think he's somewhat dangerous.
Yeah. I'm not agreeing with that. I'm actually confused. It's more confusion because I see a healthy description would be a left and a right. I think. I mean, would you agree with that? I mean, I don't want to move the conversation any much more further, unless we could say for the point of the next sort of 5 minutes, we could frame that in a left and right sort of situation, right? I mean, would you be with me on that if I said we'd look at this more on a left and a more of a conservative, liberal, Republican, Democrat sort of scenario? Would you agree with that?
I'm not a huge fan of binary choices and all that type of thing. But yeah, I mean, we can certainly look at it from that view. Sure.
Well, I guess, I mean, the only thing that I was trying to frame is that to me, it seems like you could get the same effect if you pushed it the other way, right? You could get fascism if you moved it too far to the left, and you could get you could get something like you described if you moved it too far, too far to the right.
Oh, certainly. But when you get far enough left or far enough right, you start to run into each other in the back of the room.
Yeah, right. So,
i.e., the Bernie Sanders to Donald Trump supporter pipeline. Like, that's which is a real thing. Like there's this whole cadre of people that started out as Bernie Sanders supporters and then became Trump supporters. And I'm like, well, yeah, they went so far that they found themselves on the other side all of a sudden. And
are you kidding me? Really? There's a whole cadre of Bernie supporters that turned Trump.
Millions of people. Amazing. Yes. Wow. Yeah. No, the Sanders to Trump supporter pipeline is very real. And there's a whole wing of the MAGA crowd that started out as Bernie Sanders supporters. And when Bernie's campaign never got off the ground in 2016 or 2020, they started supporting Trump instead. And, wow. and that's what I said, like, yeah, in any political environment, if you go to one extreme far enough or the other, you will start to run into the other side. You even see this on the Republican side when you get into the anti-corporate aspect of things. All of a sudden it's kind of like, oh my goodness, them and the far left could have a lot in common all of a sudden. So you have kind of these confluences of opinion on certain subjects, which for me is heartening because that's where bipartisanship and compromise happens. But yeah, it definitely can. Yes, I'm not saying that you can't get fascism from far leftism. You certainly can. Hi, China, the Soviet Union to some lesser degree. Yes, you can. You even in like a Venezuela or Chile after Allende. Yeah, you can definitely go too far one direction. You get fascism. However, in the 20th century, the right tends to create fascism more often and faster than the left does, by and large.
Okay.
And I think that's because there's I think, conserving the past what you grew up with, whatever have you, is a known entity. It's easy to hang on to that because you know what it is. It's in a container. The
Mhm.
future and progress and change is scary. It's frightening. It's unknown. What will this mean for society? What will this mean for our children? And you with the trans stuff, you hear this type of language a lot. And I'm big into Heidegger, so I'm a big believer in truth is in the language, study the words. Um, and uh, and so you have this kind of tension there. And so I think the baseline, and I say this as someone who grew up as a Republican and didn't change my party affiliation until 2012. Um, it's very easy to stay conservative, stay in that box, in that container. It is brave and daring to look to a different, brighter future that might include other things, other people, other voices, things that are new, things that are different. That's actually an act of bravery because it's unknown, it's scary, it's frightening. And I think if there's one thing I see particularly from the right in this country, I don't see it as much in Canada. I don't follow Canadian politics heavily, but I see it a lot in this country. I see it a lot in the UK. Is there's a lot of fear by right-wing voters. You see that in the Tory party in Britain, you see that in the Republican Party in this country. It's fear of the future rather than an attempt to embrace. And I think half the time why left-wing rhetoric doesn't get anywhere is we appeal to people with facts and logic, and that's not where they are. They're in
Mm.
feelings. We actually need to appeal to their emotions. That's why Donald Trump did so well. He appealed to emotion. And that
Mm.
gets you far faster in this world than appealing to facts and logic does. And what the left never very rarely does is appeal to emotion.
Mm.
And so, literally, you could solve a lot of problems if leftists would get on TV and say, yes, this is scary. Yes, this is frightening. Yes, it's a huge change. Yes, we didn't have never had this before. And that's okay. But we're going to try it now. Like to appeal to that sense of fear that is so much a part of these discussions. I think that's so important because it gets left behind.
Interesting. Yeah, really interesting. I was going to say, to give Jordan some of his props, or to give some props to Jordan, because I mean he deserves a lot. Actually, um, he he has articulated um, kind of the conservative religious, um, I guess, position from the intellectual class, right? Which isn't
Mm.
normally taken, right? It's almost like there's a societal bias that if you're religious, you're kind of stupid, right? And then you can kind of compartmentalize that and put it in a box. But he's like, wait a minute, there's a lot more depth here from a psychologist standpoint that we haven't really tapped into. And if anything, he seems to have balanced out the conversation a little bit more,
Well, he
right?
certainly provided all of those values, thoughts, and ideas in a secular packaging without the religious aspect. Which, considering no religion is the largest growing religious group in this country, I think is part of the popularity because it's all the stuff that makes it juicy without any of the God and religious stuff that has so much baggage for so many people. I'll give you
Yeah,
that. Yeah,
you know,
it
I
has a
mean,
lot of buy-in, and let's face it, it has a lot of buy-in.
yeah, I
Some of
mean,
us don't like that, but it does, and we have to acknowledge it.
yeah, I mean, you have people that maybe are not interested in a lot of the intellectual stuff, and I'll hear them say, "Oh, did you hear Jordan Peterson's lecture on Genesis or something like that?" And I'm like, "Yeah, well, I mean, because I don't gain a lot from his lectures, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I think I was already making my bed or whatever. Right? Anyways, I don't. But my point is that I can see what other people are doing with it and how people are inspired, and I can see the good in them trying to change their lives. But I can also see a militant, almost like um, worship in his aura, which that seems to be dangerous. But I don't know. Exciting talk for sure.
Yes, no, we should, before we go, you should tell, this has been fascinating, but we've gotten a little bit off track, although it was a fun detour, but we're going to pull back onto the main line now. And let's talk about Planksip. What is it? Where is it? What's your vision? Tell us about it.
So plank in two words is an organic platform, and that comes from the plank. And sip is like a sip of coffee or a hot cup of tea. And I want to use those two words in conjunction to have an organic platform where we change what consumption means. And that act of sipping or slowly enjoying the experience of learning and discovering great literature and writing about it is what the platform's all about. And that's first and foremost what I want people to do. And we're pretty successful in terms of an audience that we're a 30,000 subscriber base now. And we've got an email distribution that's pretty soon this year going to break 1 million. So I couldn't be happier. My goal is to get 10,000 paid subscribers, and that's an expensive proposition because the membership on Planksip is $100 a month. But we're looking for thought leaders that really want to be the best they can be, and it's not a call for the U.S. Army, but it's let's work together. So we're looking for those people that are really wanting to be thought leaders in their community.
Yes, no, definitely. It's a quite impressive thing. There's a lot of topics that get, sort of covered, and a lot of philosophy, a lot of literature, all this type of thing. I definitely am looking forward to adding what I do best, which tends to be more about culture and observations and things that are going on outside and weird internet trends and all this type of thing. And so yeah, so that's very exciting. How have you, here's one thing I would like to know, I think is rather interesting. How have you found such an audience for this? Because it's so odd.
Well, I think what it is that we are deliberate about making people a part of the experience. We are deliberate about freedom of speech, and we're deliberate about trying to make people a success. And I will say that a 30,000 size audience is actually not that big. I mean, it's big, but it's not that big in terms of where I would like it to be. If we had 10,000 paid members, then based on our current ratio, we would have, I think, 500,000 newsletter readers. Right now,
Right.
I mean, I've got a 48% email open rate, but the audience is still kind of sleepy in a way, right? I'm not getting tremendous amount of people. They're reading the articles, or they're opening them, they're skimming through them. So there's still a lot of work to be done, and I feel that that's going to be done at the aggregate level by attracting more and more and going from the 30,000 to 300,000. And I think it's just that ratio, and it's increasingly, exponentially getting harder and harder to keep people's attention, and harder to keep people engaged. And so it's
No, and short form video has made that all the worse. I mean, I kind of love it because I take my longer stuff and I chop it down. But it's like, I mean, I go through this every single week trying to, take something like the banking crisis and crunch it down to 60 seconds. is not
Yeah.
easy, but that's kind of where people are at. And that content does very well. It does better almost than anything else I do because it's so accessible. It's definitely a difficult thing. So yes, it's quite difficult. And I agree. It is all about the audience, all about keeping people's attention. And I think you're doing the fact that I think you've come this far is already an achievement all on its own. So here's
Well,
to
let me
bigger
leave you
and
with
brighter.
yeah. Let me leave you with one thing. I mean,
We are about to hit the top of the hour. We got to wrap it up.
so the extent that I will take something for somebody is like somebody was said to me one time, why would somebody choose Planksip over, you know, um, oh, I was thinking Medium or I was thinking Squarespace, but that's not it. It's the one where you have your own um, email newsletter or whatever, right? Anyways,
Substack.
Substack. Yes, thank you. Sorry, I had a bit of a blip there. So why would I do that? Well, you can't get in touch with anybody at Substack. You can't get in touch with anybody at Medium. You're 100% bring your own audience.
Yes.
And what makes Planksip
Medium
different,
discovery is very hard. I've been on Medium for 10 years. It's audience discovery is very hard. The only reason I have an audience at Medium is because I get picked up by other publications on Medium who share my stuff. That's where because there's so little content discovery there.
Right. So the example that I want to give, and I know we're going to wrap this up, but the example that I want to give, and you're going to be on that show next Tuesday, is the religious podcast, the video live stream with my good friend Wade Franson. Well, he's a fellow publisher. He started off as a member. I said, why don't we do a live stream? Now, we're up to 8,000 subscribers on his channel and average views of 5,000 a video. Because I don't give up and I keep working on his stuff, and we've got a team behind it, and it's not easy and it's hard work. But he's the first one there, and he's working as hard as everybody else. And so now you look at it and you say, who is out there that was a thought leader that says they want to have a team behind them? And I don't mean a team that's trying to sell them something. I mean a team that is on the same vested path as you are. And that's the Planksip difference. And that's why it resonates. And that's why people stick around. And that's why people join the community, because we're a group of people that are all trying to support each other, and it shows. That's it, really. It should be that simple, and it really is.
Yeah, no, that is the power of community. So, well, let's wrap this up. Why don't you tell us where you are online, where we can get in touch with you on social media, and all that sort of thing.
Well, it's so funny. I do the hashtag Google Planksip because, I'm being cheeky, because it's like there's an act in there, right? I mean, it's like the act of Googling. But that's really what it is. It's Planksip, Planksip, and anything on the internet that has to do with Planksip is our media outlet or a derivative of. And so planksip.org, and the YouTube channel, again, at Planksip. Our most successful one is actually Durant and Friends. I have 50,000 subscribers on that one. But come check us out. Better yet, sign up, be a free member. Better yet, sign up, be a paid member. So we'd love to have you. And that's Planksip for you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Mr. Sanderson, for coming on the Cameron Journal podcast, and we'll stay in touch. That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, and we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast.